Making headlines tonight, North Korea's spy agency has begun work to implement Kim Jong-un's order to launch terror attacks on South Koreans. That's according to South Korean government. Denuclearization of North Korea must precede peace treaty talks. South Korea's response to China's offer of formal consultations on replacing the armistice on the peninsula. And Korea was the sixth largest exporter in the world last year, despite sluggish outbound shipments. We'll tell you why. News Center begins right now. It is 8 a.m. in New York, 12 noon in London, and 10 on a Thursday night here in Seoul. Hello and welcome to our viewers all across the globe. You're watching Arirang News Center. We begin here on the Korean peninsula. South Korea says North Korean leader Kim Jong-un recently ordered preparations for launching terror attacks on South Koreans. This is why Seoul's presidential office is asking for quick passage of an anti-terror bill in parliament. Our Song Ji-sun from the nation's top office of Cheongwade.
North Korea is intensifying preparations to carry out various terror attacks on the south. That's what South Korea's spy agency reported at an emergency security meeting with the parliament on Thursday. The possible attacks, which have likely been ordered by North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, could range from cyber and biochemical terror to even abduction of South Korean government officials. On these possibilities, the presidential office of Cheongwade urged for preparations beforehand, saying that it's no use to mend a barn after the horse is stolen.
It's a pity that the National Assembly has yet to pass the counterterrorism bill, which can effectively tackle terror threats from North Korea or other international terrorist groups.
The call follows President Park's remarks to lawmakers during her parliamentary address a couple of days ago.
그 과정에서 북한이 각종 도발로 혼란을 야기하고 남남 갈등을 조장하고 우리의 국론을 분열시키기 위한 선동을 강화할 수도 있습니다. 그럴수록 우리 국민들의 단합과 국회의 단일된 힘이 북한의 의도를 저지할 수 있는 유일한 방법이라고 생각합니다.
With North Korean terror attacks becoming more likely to happen anytime soon, the presidential office called on lawmakers to help establish a systematic and legal ground to guarantee the protection of the people and assets of the South. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
With the possibility of North Korean attacks increasing more than ever, as high-level officials here in the South put it, there are growing speculations over how and what forms the terrorist attacks could take. Our Kwon So-ah takes a look at how these terrorist attacks could be launched on the South Korean people and whether Seoul is prepared.
Since North Korea's fourth nuclear test in January, South Korea's National Intelligence Service has been watching for signs of impending terror attacks from Pyongyang, including the possibility of cyber attacks. North Korea has a history of hacking into South Korean systems, targeting a media company, a financial institution, and a nuclear power reactor since a third nuclear test in 2013. But on Thursday, lawmakers listed even more possibilities, such as abductions of anti-North Korea activists, defectors, or government officials, or the delivery of threat letters or parcels to media outlets that criticize Pyongyang.
Public facilities and key structures such as subways, shopping malls, and power stations could also become targets.
Related ministries vowed to prepare for any threats from North Korea in all possible forms. Seoul's Defense Minister Han Min-gu said that the annual military drills between Seoul and Washington that kick off in March will be the largest ever, around double the size of last year's.
Our military has sufficient power to customize our strategy based on the South Korea-US joint defense system to deter and respond to any threats.
Seoul's Foreign Affairs Ministry says the so-called standing structure is in place and ready to protect South Korean nationals abroad in the event of terror attacks.
We have given an order to all of our diplomatic offices to be prepared for terror attacks.
There are concerns that the North's new threats could create uneasiness in South Korea and beyond, as terrorist acts would affect the people in a more direct way than the North's nuclear and missile tests. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
As our Kwon just mentioned, the upcoming South Korea-U.S. joint military drills will be the largest to date, both in manpower and military hardware. The two allies will conduct the exercises with various scenarios in mind, including a preemptive strike on North Korea's nuclear facility and missile sites. Our national defense correspondent Kim Hyun-bin gives us a preview of how the double exercises will be played out.
15,000 American soldiers will be involved, along with some of the most powerful pieces of hardware in the U.S. military's arsenal, including the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier USS John C. Stennis and a nuclear submarine. Some 290,000 South Korean troops will also take part in the drills, and both allies have stressed that the joint exercises are purely defensive in nature. A military official says that the drills are aimed at giving a strong warning to Pyongyang, showing that both Seoul and Washington are capable of neutralizing the communist state at any given time. Meanwhile, official talks are underway regarding the deployment of the U.S. missile defense system THAAD into South Korea to better counter any possible missile attacks by the North.
Protecting the lives of our citizens from North Korea's nuclear-tipped missiles is our top priority. We will approach this issue and make a decision based on our right of self-defense.
Defense Minister Han said the THAAD system will be able to better protect South Korea. He emphasized that the current ongoing talks will help the allies to find the best locations to place THAAD batteries without affecting the safety of local residents or the surrounding environment. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the South Korean military has retrieved debris from the West Sea today, presumed to be the first stage of the long-range missile North Korea launched earlier this month. A military official said the recovered piece looks to be a fuel container from the first stage of the rocket. Now, the South Korean military has been in search for debris from the three-stage rocket to better analyze Pyongyang's long-distance missile capabilities. That part will be sent to the Agency for Defense Development for further analysis. South Korea's foreign ministry says it is just too early to reopen talks with North Korea. That's in response to the Chinese foreign minister's proposal of formal consultations on replacing the armistice agreement with a peace treaty instead of pressuring Pyongyang with sanctions. Kwon Jang-ho has this report.
Seoul's foreign ministry has rejected China's calls to reopen the six-party talks in response to North Korea's recent actions. The ministry spokesperson said that North Korea first needs to stop its provocations and show it is serious about denuclearization. He said, in accordance with the landmark September 19th joint statement, establishing a framework for peace on the peninsula could be discussed by the relevant parties only after the North makes progress towards denuclearization. The joint statement was reached in 2005 at a round of six-party talks where North Korea agreed to abandon its nuclear weapons program in exchange for economic and political aid. But talks stalled in 2008 after the regime carried out its first nuclear weapons test, which it followed with another 3 tests since then. The UN Security Council is currently working on a draft resolution for stronger sanctions on North Korea, but China has already expressed its reservations.
The world's hot-button issues can't be resolved through pressure or sanctions, let alone military means. They will only exacerbate the situation. All parties should consider the resumption of talks while a new UN Security Council resolution is being discussed.
Meanwhile, the White House has reaffirmed that President Obama will sign a North Korean sanctions bill that overwhelmingly passed Congress last week. It's one of the strongest sanctions bills to pass both the House and the Senate, and the first to target North Korea specifically. The White House spokesperson said North Korea will continue to be isolated until it takes steps towards not just the US and South Korea, but also China, with which it has a vital relationship. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
Turning now to day one of a 2-day parliamentary interpellation session here in Seoul. Lawmakers' questions centered around the recently shut down inter-Korean complex and deployment of a sophisticated U.S. missile defense system to the Korean peninsula. Our Shin Se-min has the details of what unfolded in Parliament today.
Inter-Korean relations and national security took the center stage on the first day of a two-day parliamentary interpellation sessions on Thursday. Lawmakers were divided along partisan lines on both issues. On the government's decision to shut down the Inter-Korean factory park, the ruling Saenuri party sided with the government and said the choice was inevitable. The main opposition, Minju Party of Korea, questioned the validity of the decision. The party also followed up on an earlier claim by the unification minister, asking him whether the government has the evidence that the money made by the North Korean workers at the Inter-Korean factory park was used by the regime for its nuclear and missile development programs.
You have switched your words multiple times. Are there valid documents to back up such claims?
As I've said before, the government understands that there have been occasions when the money was channeled into two offices of the regime to be used for weapons development.
National security was also in focus during the session, including possible deployment of the U.S. missile defense system known as THAAD on the Korean peninsula. The defense minister responded to allegations that the system does not strategically correspond to the threats from the north.
The system is made to shoot down the North Scud missiles. So with it, the ability of the ROK US forces to counter the threats from the north would be enhanced.
On the issue of national security, Prime Minister Hwang Kyo-ahn said the government stands firm on the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula in response to recent policy debates on whether Seoul should have its own nuclear arsenal. The second interpellation session, which focuses on the economy, will take place on Friday. It's expected to revolve around the issues of the country's ambitious reform drives that includes the labor sector. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
We brought you the details of the Korean government's new set of measures designed to promote investment in hopes of creating new growth engines and eventually more jobs. But creating this virtuous circle comes with its own set of challenges. Our Hwang Ji-hye reports.
Creating around 500,000 jobs and shaking loose roughly $40 billion worth of investment. These are goals set forward by the government as it announced a new set of measures this week to prop up investment. But it's going to be a bumpy road ahead. Out of around 120 tasks included in the fresh measures, about 1/5 require revisions to related laws. With a number of economy-related bills already being held up at the National Assembly and political parties stuck in gridlock, making these amendments looks more than challenging.
국회 협조가 좀 필요할 것 같고요.
Cooperation from the National Assembly is a must. The government also has to persuade parties with related interests when it comes to fostering new growth engines.
While putting new fields of growth at the forefront by cutting red tape and new service industries like the sharing economy, sports, and healthcare is viewed as a big step forward in revitalizing the economy, experts say more could be done.
From the perspective of people who are actually doing business, they still feel there's a great burden from regulations.
Some experts add the new package could also have incorporated measures to support local manufacturers that have traditionally generated wealth for the economy, especially at a time of slowing global demand. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Now, despite sluggish outbound shipments in the last year or so, Korea has moved up a notch to become the world's 6th largest exporter. It's the country's highest ranking ever, but according to our EG1, the future isn't as rosy.
Korea was the world's 6th largest exporter last year, moving up a notch from the year before, despite the sluggish global economy and low global oil prices. According to the World Trade Organization on Thursday, Korea's exports amounted to $527 billion last year, putting the country in 6th out of the 71 exporters surveyed. China topped the list with $2.27 trillion, followed by the US with $1.5 trillion and Germany with $1.3 trillion. The report says with the global economic slump and low oil prices, the world's export volume decreased by about 11% last year. But the impact was relatively less severe for Korea, which saw its exports decline 8% last year from 2014, increasing Korea's share of global export volume. Korea has been rising in the WTO's ranking in recent years. In 2008, Korea ranked 12th. It moved up to 9th the following year, and now 7 years later has gone up 6 notches to 6th. But the news isn't all good. Korea has been suffering from sluggish exports for 13 straight months since January of last year, and could continue for a 14th month if the streak continues through this month. That's the longest period of decline since record-keeping began in 1970.
Korea may have moved up a notch in the WTO's rankings, but that's because exports are sluggish worldwide for numerous reasons, but mainly the slowdown of the global economy and especially the oversupply from China. The Korean government can support export firms by improving the export environment through free trade agreements and through trade policy.
But analysts think that those solutions will not be enough as the problems originated outside of the country, meaning that they won't be resolved in the short term. That leads the analysts to predict that the downward trend will continue for a while. 이지원, Arirang News.
Iran has offered support for the first joint OPEC and non-OPEC deal in 15 years to put a ceiling on oil production. Now on the news, oil prices enjoyed an upswing, but as it's unclear whether Tehran will join the move to freeze output at January levels, analysts expect downward pressure to continue. Kim Min-ji reports.
Global oil prices surged on Wednesday. West Texas Intermediate spiked more than 5% to finish at over $30 a barrel, while Brent crude jumped over 7% to $34.59. The surprise uptick came after Iran voiced support for a recent agreement between crude giants Russia, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Venezuela to freeze levels of oil production at January levels. But it remains to be seen if Iran will follow suit, as it did not offer any word, and Tehran earlier said it would boost production to regain market share after years of sanctions.
I do not believe that Iran will be willing anytime soon to agree in order to, they're not going to be willing to leave the game before they started.
Global oil prices have plunged over 70% in the past 20 months, driven by near-record production from OPEC and other producers. Analysts expect the downward pressure on oil to continue.
For one, the U.S. is not part of the deal, and it remains to be seen whether the countries that agreed to it will keep their word. Also, who is going to monitor this, and how will sanctions be imposed if it's violated? On top of that, Iran is nowhere near producing the full amount it can, as it's still subject to sanctions in some areas. When Iran reaches full capacity, the supply glut is just going to get worse.
Many analysts are on the same page that the move to freeze, not cut the output, will make little difference to the ongoing supply-demand imbalance, keeping prices from rising anytime soon. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
The Korean government will invest in nearly $2.5 million in research and development of treatment for the Zika virus amid growing concerns that it may reach this country as well. Well, the research is expected to focus on developing core technologies related to the treatment of the Zika virus, as well as diagnosis kits. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
The Korean government is stepping up efforts to prevent a Zika virus outbreak in the country. The Ministry of Science, ICT and Future Planning says it will work towards finding a cure for the Zika virus. It plans to invest more than $2.4 million to hire 3 teams of researchers over the next 3 years. Researchers will be tasked on developing core technologies that can help define the virus's pathogen, as well as a diagnosis kit. They will also aim at predicting the possibilities of a mutation of the virus if it enters the country. The ministry also hopes to collaborate with international networks, such as the Global Research Collaboration for Infectious Disease Preparedness, in order to secure the specimen of the virus directly from infected areas. The plan is part of the government's comprehensive precautionary measures against a possible spread of the Zika virus in Korea.
Although there have been no confirmed cases of the Zika virus in Korea, the ministry is making preparations so that the country can readily deal with an outbreak if it happens in the future, utilizing the lessons learned from coping with the MERS outbreak last year.
The Zika virus, which can be transmitted through mosquito bites, is suspected of causing microcephaly among babies. The incubation period for the virus is known to last 2 weeks, but the survival period or the virus's pathogen is currently not yet clearly defined. The World Health Organization said the Zika virus has spread across at least 30 countries and has been linked to thousands of birth defects in Latin America. Kim Jeon, Arirang News.
U.S. President Barack Obama is set to become the first sitting American president to step on Cuban soil in 88 years, as no other has visited Havana since Calvin Coolidge in 1928. Well, the announcement, which is expected to be made on Thursday in Washington, will come only 2 days after the U.S. and Cuba signed an agreement restoring commercial air traffic between the two countries for the first time in 50 years. Oh Soo-young reports.
President Barack Obama will travel to Cuba in March, the first sitting U.S. head of state to do so in almost 9 decades. Several U.S. officials revealed Wednesday that the president was stopped by Havana as part of a broader trip to Latin America. Obama had mentioned last December that he would very much like to visit Cuba to meet with political dissidents in efforts to broaden the scope for free expression in the country. The trip is expected to cement his diplomatic legacy in normalizing bilateral ties, which were restored in 2014 after 5 decades of animosity rooted in the Cold War. Respective embassies reopened in Washington and Havana last year. Trade and travel restrictions are also being eased after 54 years. The two countries signed a deal this week to resume commercial flights, and the Obama administration approved the construction of the first U.S. factory in Cuban territory. The reported travel plans, however, have sparked criticism from Republican presidential hopefuls Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, who are the only 2 Cuban Americans running for the GOP presidential nomination in 2016. Rubio said in an interview that he wouldn't visit the country as long as the Castros were in power and unless it was a free Cuba. Meanwhile, Cruz called the visit a real mistake, saying Obama has shown weakness and appeasement to the country's enemies. The White House is expected to officially announce the president's travel schedule on Thursday. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Well, Apple is taking on the U.S. government in a case that could send a new signal to Washington that its reach is limited when it comes to electronic privacy. Bruce Harrison is live in the studio with me for more on the divide between privacy and security. Bruce, tell us the basics of this case.
Sure, Kang-young. Well, the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, essentially wants Apple to unlock the smartphone of one of the shooters in last December's terrorist attack in San Bernardino, California. Apple's refused to do that voluntarily, and then it received a court order to assist the U.S. government in its investigation. It rejected that as well, and now we're looking at a real legal battle.
Well, what would be the implications for everyday smartphone users if the FBI gets its way and is allowed to pull data off the shooter's phone?
Well, Washington has its own opinion on that, and so do people within the tech industry. White House spokesman Josh Earnest said that Justice Department's asking Apple to override the encryption of just one phone. Essentially, he said unlocking it would not impact other Apple users. Some experts agree the national security threat is great enough. The public and private sectors need to work together.
Got to be a middle ground here. We've always in this country balanced privacy on one hand with security on the other. We've got to refine that balance because today the situation is unsustainable.
Unsustainable, experts say, because of growing terror threats around the world. But Apple CEO Tim Cook says the implications are much wider than one iPhone. In an open letter, he said the software the FBI wants Apple to create to unlock the shooter's iPhone would have the potential to unlock any iPhone in someone's physical possession if it fell into the wrong hands. In one Reuters report, the author said the federal government already has the skills necessary to break into the phone. He said this isn't about gathering information on a terrorist, but about setting a legal precedent. The case has also provided timely fodder for Republican presidential candidates. Some, including Donald Trump and Marco Rubio, say they hope Apple comes around and unlocks the phone for the sake of national security. Turkey responded to a fatal car bombing in N.Korea by dropping bombs just hours later on Kurdish forces in northern Iraq. The Turkish government blamed the blast that killed 28 people in Ankara on a Syrian Kurdish militia fighter working with Kurdish militants inside Turkey. The government believes the Kurdistan Workers' Party collaborated in the car bombing, so warplanes bombed the party's bases in Iraq. Meanwhile, Turkey continues to shell Syrian Kurdish YPG militia in response to cross-border fire.
If somebody will fire mortar bombs or bullets at Turkey, they should know that Turkey will give as good as it gets.
The president has also called on the United States to decide whether it's backing Turkey or the Kurdish insurgents, which the Turkish state has been fighting for decades. The U.S. has been supporting Syrian Kurdish fighters in its fight against the Islamic State in that region.
Now, Bruce, Toyota is recalling nearly 3 million vehicles around the world over potentially faulty seatbelts. So what is the defect exactly, and which models are involved?
Well, apparently in the models in question, the seatbelts could be damaged by the metal seat frame within those cars. Toyota's received 2 reports in which rear seatbelts were actually severed during car crashes. The company says the recall involves its RAV4 SUV model produced between July 2005 and August 2014, sold around the world, and its Vanguard SUV model produced between October 2005 and January 2016, sold only in Japan. Toyota says it would add resin covers to the metal seat cushion frames on affected cars to prevent seat belts from being cut.
Bruce, give us some sense, some scale as to the size of this recall.
Okay, this is definitely a big recall, nearly 3 million cars, but it's not the biggest. Toyota in 2009 recalled more than 4 million cars for an acceleration issue, and then in 1980, Ford Motors actually recalled 21 million cars because they were slipping from park and into reverse.
Wow, that is one big defect, I would say.
Exactly, yeah. So
wow.
This is a big one, but compared to history, it's definitely not the biggest.
Right. Well, we'll have to wait and see what happens with that and what exactly is investigated as a real defect there, and whether it is potentially very dangerous.
Sure.
All right, Bruce, thank you so much for that.
My pleasure.
No, I would say it was a bit gloomy and windy today, but it definitely felt like we are getting closer to spring. So, for more on the latest weather updates, let's go over to our Lee Ji-hyun. Ji-hyun.
Hello, Geon-young. Yes, as you've just said, it was gray and even spotty rain fell on some parts of the capital, including here in Seocho district this afternoon.
Right, conditions weren't all that favorable, but you know, we haven't had this coming in a while, and I hear the level of fine dust could go up in the southern provinces tomorrow.
That is correct, Geon-young. So those of you in the southern parts of the country, you need to have a mask handy as dusty conditions are expected to worsen throughout the day tomorrow, while the upper parts will have normal levels all day long. But beware that the capital areas could also see levels rising in the morning. Clouds were dominating the peninsula, and wet clouds could be formed, dropping snow on some parts of Gangwon-do province till early tomorrow morning, while the rest of the peninsula will have partly sunny skies, but the southern coastal regions could receive spotty rain tomorrow night of up to 5 millimeters. Now, temperature-wise, it will be similar to a tad lower than today, so let's take a closer look. Daily low here in Seoul will start out at -1 degree Celsius, 0 for Daejeon and Daegu, and Busan and Jeju will start out the day at 6 and 8. And as for the daily highs, Seoul will climb up to 6, 11 for Daegu and Gwangju, and Busan and Jeju will top out at 12 degrees Celsius. Until Saturday, temperatures should remain above the seasonal averages. Then there should be a slight drop in temperatures starting Sunday, but skies will remain mostly to partly sunny for the time being here in the capital. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that is our broadcast on this Thursday night. I'm Moon Gun-young. Thank you for watching. We hope to see you right back here, same time tomorrow on NewsCenter.